Welcome to the Founder Hour podcast. Before we get into the episode, just a quick word about our sponsor, Outer. You know I've raved about Outer before, and I love my Outer sofa, outdoor dining table, and chairs. I've had them for over a year, and let me tell you, they've been through everything from rainstorms to scorching sun and still look brand new. That's because Outer makes outdoor furniture that's actually designed for the outdoors. From using incredibly durable and sustainable materials to developing innovative solutions like the Outer Shell Cover, which protects my sofa and dining table against dust, debris, and dirt. No more soggy cushions or dusty tabletops. My Outer setup is always clean, dry, and ready to be enjoyed anytime I want. Head to liveouter.com/thefounderhour to see Outer's range of outdoor furniture, fire pits, and accessories. The Founder Hour listeners get an exclusive 10% off for a limited time. Terms and conditions apply. So elevate your outdoor space with Outer. That's liveouter.com/thefounderhour. Here we go.
Larry, thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate you being here. We were talking a little offline about, we're both in LA. We're recording this in LA. Did you also grow up in LA or did you move here at some point?
No, I moved to LA. I moved to California early 90s, moved to LA in kind of the late 90s. But I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, so from the Midwest.
Nice. How's life like in growing up there?
It was good. I would say I kind of grew up primarily in the kind of 70s, 80s. And I would say kind of Stranger Things vibes, I would say. A lot of lived in big suburb. I was in the suburbs of St. Louis and, lots of time hanging out with your friends, finding mischief, riding your bikes, around the neighborhood. Those were the types of things that we were kind of into as kids. Yeah.
Every time I watch the show Stranger Things, that's what you're alluding to, I'm assuming.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I always wish I lived in that era. It just seems so cool. Like that, like the 80s era with the neon signs and just like the music and all that stuff. It seems like such a, I don't know, life was so different back then.
Yeah, I think you always look back and think, anyone who's doing that is where I kind of thinks of it as like simpler times. I tend to think a lot about the future, so I don't like to look back too much. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty basic, right? Like, you had not a lot of different choices to, that was kind of at the dawning of cable television, right? So you had things like MTV and those types of things, which were fun from a kind of media consumption standpoint, but it pales in comparison to what my kids have today, right? You've got a supercomputer in your hands. You've got access to any idea or thought you might have to explore. So it was a lot harder from that perspective. And you had to entertain yourself in, different ways.
As someone whose head is, you said always in the future, how much of the past do you think affects the future? How much of the past do you spend time in at all as a way to sort of help shape where you think the future is going?
Yeah, I think it really benefits you to be a student of whatever you're into. Certainly in business, and kind of our area of business is sort of media, new media. Having those touchstones of how it worked before is super valuable to as you're starting to navigate in this new world, right? The VCs like to call it pattern recognition, right? The ability to kind of see something that, kind of looks like something before, but obviously it has some modern twist on it. That's a big part of kind of what, we've been doing at the companies I've worked at is, understanding some of those basics, but understanding that, there's been a level of innovation, but you can, I do that often. You can kind of harken back to different eras of my career where I could say I was working on a particular project or a certain type of business relationship, and it's very obvious to me it's the same.
Yeah, it's almost like if it's worked in the past, with how complex humans are, right? If it's worked with humans in the past, maybe there's something there. Like maybe let's not reinvent the whole wheel. Let's just kind of, shine it up a little bit.
Well, you've seen that with, just really successful businesses, people who, aren't trying to, some people are going to send rockets to the moon and those types of things. But other people, when they're business building, if you can start with something that is obvious and known, and then really iterate on it, we've seen a lot of people be very successful with that.
Totally. Were you always interested in the media space, content, film, music, like that kind of?
Yeah, I think for me, it sort of started with music. I was, it's even surprising to me, as I mentioned, just comparatively to what people have access today. You're in the Midwest. there is, and I was particularly, kind of focused on new music, right?
Mhm.
Punk and new wave and those types of things. And it was hard to get access to that type of content or those types of things. But, you kind of find a vein,
Mhm.
and, it's kind of a vein plus, I think, a community. And if you can, and maybe have some people along the way, I had some next door neighbors that were a little bit older than me who were really into music, and so that helped me. Right, it gave me a little bit of some music mentors that then became kind of collaborators, people who would share stuff with each other. But once I was able to sort of find a vein, I think it really, for me, started with music and going to see bands and shows. That was really cool, and then a little bit later came kind of with that same crew. People started to get into movies and and entertainment and those types of things, and so that kind of spawned some, for me, kind of an real interest in that.
Yeah. What are some you mentioned like punk and new wave? What are some genres of film, maybe, or other sort of genres that you had particular interest in?
Yeah, look, I mean, that sort of early '70s stuff, like
Back to the Future?
no, not so much like that, like
Yeah.
Raging Bull, The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, kind of that Paramount. There's been some great content, actually. There's a good series that came about, kind of that Robert Evans phase.
Mm-hmm.
Those types of things, I was getting kind of turned on to those. So I would say that, again, this was sort of like just around the time where the video store was popping.
Yeah.
And again, I had some kind of friends who had some good taste, which kind of turned me on to some things like that. And then from there, you just kind of keep building, right? You try to understand what is really good, what's, some of that more gritty stuff, which really went into, going to see a lot of independent film, going to the, kind of, we had a few movie theaters in St. Louis that were sort of geared towards that, some of the art houses. And so I kind of was drawn to that.
Yeah. It's so interesting, like, kind of living maybe in like a smaller town, somewhat, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean, it's
compared to like an LA.
It's certainly not in LA. It's kind of a top 20 city kind of as I was growing up. Still had, the metropolitan area was still like a decent size.
Yep.
But yeah, it's much smaller. And again, if you go back in time, my doorway to the outside world, you really had to seek it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I became very, this was a little bit later, right? In college, reading zines or, going to the books, going to the magazine racks and trying to find stuff. I learned a lot, or found a lot of kind of new things that way. I remember, there was sort of a hacker zine called 2600. I still think it exists today. It was a doorway into a world that I didn't know. That was kind of actually one of the ways I started to get interested in tech.
Yep.
There was a magazine called Mondo 2000 that was kind of coming out of San Francisco. That was sort of cyberpunk. It was art. It had some music. It had tech. It was kind of melting. It would be, early.
That would do really well now. That sounds so cool.
Yeah, it's a very cool magazine. It was sort of the predecessor to Wired. And,
okay.
I remember like buying the first 4 episodes or issues of Wired off the stand.
Yep.
When that magazine was coming into. So that's where I, kind of was able to get a bit of doorways into maybe what was happening in California and what was happening in the tech scene and those types of things, which, I found cool and inspiring.
Yeah. Did you have like these bigger aspirations at the time of wanting to perhaps, I don't know, go out and build a company or anything like that?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I kind of go to a little bit of origins, right? So I grew up in a family. My family, my parents owned a small business, and so I think in that, growing up with that, there's pros and cons, right? You kind of see the autonomy, the independence, but you also see the perils of being a small business owner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I saw it all. It's funny to me because I have 2 sisters. One went on to start, was kind of very successful, worked in PR at one of the major firms, but she's owned and operated her own PR firm for quite a while. It's really successful. My other sister married essentially an entrepreneur who built, kind of along with his family, built a really big business. So it's a little bit funny to me because you sit around the dinner table, you're experiencing the ups and downs of small business, and it's funny to me that all of us kind of pursued this in some way. For me, I think and really kind of probably kicked in college, I just became really interested in the stock market, and kind of what was happening there. I kind of started studying. Okay, well, I want to understand IPOs, and what I found with IPOs is a lot of the IPOs that were happening were software companies from California and from Silicon Valley and companies like that. And so that's kind of what originally kind of got my interest there. And then as I melded into kind of that Mondo 2000 Wired phase, that's a place where it kind of captured I saw that, my interest could be sort of satisfied. There were people doing cool artistic things. There was, new video game companies being built at the time, which kind of converged technology and entertainment. And so that's where maybe that base kind of started to come together, was sort of, kind of like a business interest. Yeah, I am interested in maybe, kind of building something, coupled with, kind of my interest in these, entertainment. And then, as I started to see other people talking about it, and I think Wired did a really good job at this, but sort of talking about that intersection early, about how those two things were going to fuse, that kind of captured my imagination.
And so, what did you end up studying in college? Was it business?
No, I was a communications major, PR.
Okay.
So, I went to St. Louis University, which is, was when I was in St. Louis. And, that was a great foundation. I think college is as much about kind of what you study. Obviously, if you're a serious person, like you want to be a doctor, it's probably a little bit more important. But I think it's as much about, what you study, about that experience that you capture while you're there. And I had great experiences, met lots of different people from all over the world, built really amazing relationships, hung out with people that were way smarter than me, who, thought differently than me and challenged the way I thought. And so I think that was a big part of at least the value I got of that experience.
Yeah. And just for context, around what time is this? Like what?
That would have been like in the early 90s.
Early 90s. So the sort of the internet maybe is just starting to take off or hasn't taken off yet?
Yeah, I got my first sort of post-college first job in like, it would have been like in 90, 93. So yeah, right, at that first job. So my first job was with, we were talking about it earlier because you had the CEO of On Your Pod, which was Paul Orfila. I went to work at Kinko's. I was working at a Kinko's when I was in college. And after college, I got an opportunity to work for the headquarters, which was in Ventura, California.
And so that's why you moved to California for that.
Yeah, it was. And the opportunity was we rolled out this computer system to all the stores. It was part of a kind of a roll up of those entities. With a little bit of history, is Paul had started Kinko's, but he did it through partnerships. So he had 128 different partners.
Yep.
And then he partnered with private equity, bought all of those, who eventually bought out all those partnerships. But because all of those, there's 100 different, partners, they had different systems. So we rolled out essentially what is Square today, a touch screen based, cash register system that collects all the data and then could push it up to the mothership, which was in Ventura.
So it takes all that data and sort of spits out like it just synthesizes and basically like says,
it sends it to the home office. But prior to that, it was all done by phones and people were, it was pretty archaic. Not too exciting technology today, but back then it was pretty state of the art. So out of college, I got a project where we rolled that system out all over the country, which was an amazing experience in itself. And then when I went back to work at the headquarters in the technology department, essentially. Yeah.
And then I think I saw you ended up at CitySearch.
I did. Yeah. So, from, I had a great experience at Kinko's. We were talking about sort of access, the era, that is the place where I saw the internet for the first time. We had just gotten connected. That was before Netscape went public and those types of things. And so, at that, place, I got a great access to technology, ultimately ran a software development team. So I learned about how to build products and those types of things. And then, kind of hearkening back to that sort of intersection of technology and entertainment, that had sort of never left me. And there was an opportunity for me to move to LA to work for a company called Intertainer. And Intertainer is basically, was sort of started in 96. I joined in 98. That company was basically Netflix like 10 years too early. So,
so they were trying to do like a DVD rentals? Or
no, we were
streaming?
streaming movies and television from the world's biggest studios.
Wow.
And television companies. At first, kind of in a VOD basis, like partnering with the Comcast of the world and the telcos of the time, Verizon's, those people. But ultimately was streaming that stuff over the internet on a subscription basis.
Wow.
The issue was there was only 200,000 people in the United States who had enough bandwidth to accept the service. So it's just before its time. It was kind of raised a bunch of money, raised like $120 million. I didn't do that. The
That's
founders
a lot
did.
for that time.
Yeah, it was sort of part of that first .com era.
Yeah.
And so, raised a bunch of money, had great partners, Microsoft, NBC, Sony, Intel. It was really
wow. So this was going to be the thing.
It really was it was the idea. It was just way too early. I think that's obviously that's a lesson we, I don't know if I've fully learned it, but it's a lesson that does carry through, right? Timing is key on all these ideas. It was the right idea. It was just, it was too early to execute. So from there, that company essentially went away kind of during that .com bust era. And then, I went to work at IAC. And the company I worked with at IAC Interactive Corp was CitySearch, where I headed up business development.
So they already owned CitySearch by this time.
They already owned it. Yeah, they owned IAC at that time owned Ticketmaster, Expedia, TripAdvisor, many, many brands.
Yep. I've had Rich Barton on the show. I've had Stephen Koffer on the show.
Yeah, sure.
So it seems like IAC is just as recurring. I think I interviewed Angie's List, Angie Hicks. I think they're also owned by them too. They just own everybody. Match Group, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
Barry Diller has been pretty crazy over the last, I don't know, several decades of like acquiring these like huge.
Yeah,
companies.
he really went after the marketplaces, and stuck it out and built those over time, and really a great outcome. Because what they acquire these businesses and then really monetize them when they spun them out. So I think it's been a pretty good return for shareholders.
Yeah. What was your like in sort of like the early days of your career? What was your approach to figuring out where you wanted to work? Was it just whatever seemed interesting to you, or was there like a particular like measure that you were like, oh, I need to find a company that checks these boxes? Yeah,
I would say the allure to, certainly around Entertainer was that, like, I learned about that company by like reading, there was a magazine at the time which came after Wired, which was called Business 2.0. And there was another magazine called Red Herring. So I was always a big consumer of media, trying to understand what was happening. And those two publications did a good job of sort of like talking about what's next, right? There was no TechCrunch to go to and see what was happening. So you had to kind of seek this out. And so Entertainer was, again, that perfect marrying for me of that, my interest in technology as well as entertainment. And what I did for them, and particularly in the beginning, was really kind of run the technical trials, right? We were, rolling out this product for the first time for video on demand in different parts of the country. And that was sort of what I focused on. I think with CitySearch, it was a couple of different things. One, to be frank, in LA at the time, there was not, 100 different, particularly because the .com bust had essentially happened. There weren't the breadth of companies that are here today. It's certainly not as robust as a venture scene. So the options weren't as broad as maybe they are today. But a couple of things. One is I did know who, because I was kind of a student of entertainment, and all of that, I did know who Barry Diller was. And so that was kind of like, well, if someone's going to figure out how these two things intersect, technology and entertainment, there's a chance it's going to be a company called Interactive Corp, and Barry Diller might be involved.
Yep.
And then the second was, I just loved the CitySearch product. It was a great product. It kind of should exist today. It doesn't.
Remind me again. I know CitySearch, but like I kind of forgot what was like the core product of CitySearch.
It was sort of like the perfect marrying of if you put Yelp and Eater together.
Okay, so it had to do with food.
It was very food centric. It was a city guide. So it was like, what if you wanted to know what you were going to do this weekend, or if you had a date and you wanted to plan your date and you wanted to be cool, you could use this in the same way that you might use Eater today. I mean, Eater is an amazing product.
Right.
if you wanted to kind of be the first or be what's happening, see what's happening, it was just a great product. And, they did like great listicles. They would do a, kind of a best of the city. And so, yeah, if you're new to LA and you wanted to know what the best restaurants are, or if you wanted to create a hit list for yourself to go check out the best places, it really did that job. But it also had kind of the full utility as a Yelp, right? So it had the full database, if you will.
To your point, I think you're right. I think that would totally, like, I feel like that's something that there's been cycles of it, but it seems like there hasn't been one authority on, like, this is the place to go. There's always, like, sometimes, Eater, and then you go to, like, the Infatuation, and then you go to Tastemade, like, you go to different places and just sort of try to see who has the best pulse on what's good right now in this very moment. Because 3 months from now, it might be another guide that comes out, right? Like, why do you think that is?
Well, I think any local media is hard. To be honest, the monetization, particularly if it's a restaurant-centric local media, the restaurants themselves aren't, because the turnover and of restaurants, it's just a hard category to monetize. Obviously, Yelp has done a good job of that, but as you know, right, Yelp is now all categories. Yeah. Part of the reason why they're all categories is because some of those other categories just are way easier to monetize than, monetizing restaurants. There's like things you can do with, I think that's why some of the credit card brands have aligned with some of these, because I think a national advertiser makes sense for them. But that local media business, if you're calling mom and pop restaurants and trying to get them into some internet advertising product, people are doing it, but it's hard. So I think that's why you maybe haven't seen the proliferation. I think Yelp is still it's, kind of database driven, and it's a list, and it's user generated. At CitySearch, it wasn't user generated. It was sort of pure pre-user generated content. It certainly had comments and people could vote and things like that, but it had a really strong editorial. And so I think that's part of the difference. But it just did it at a greater scale than Eater. Eater's a little bit tighter. Their focus is a little bit, not everything, but, trying to take the cherry off, kind of the cherry on top stuff.
What did you learn? 'Cause I know eventually you ended up going to Demand Media and sort of helping start that up. And I think I saw early on you were focused on monetization there. What did you learn about content and monetization, perhaps even at CitySearch, that maybe you even use today, like some of the best practices?
Yeah, there was kind of two key things. The key learning from my time at CitySearch was I really understood. I got to learn search. And it was something that we all kind of learned together. It wasn't like, today you might roll in and there's maybe that one expert who's really the SEO, the really SEO expert. And this one, we really kind of did it as a team. And then from there emerged some brilliant people who kind of understand search probably better from a publisher side than anyone.
Yep.
And so that was kind of one of the key learnings. We were able to unlock that. And it had massive impact on our audience, right? So I don't remember the numbers exactly, but it was like, we had 4 million uniques and it went to 17 and then 30. And it was largely on the back of, again, this is the early 2000s, right? So I was there from like 2002 to 2006. The bot.com bust had happened. Google was emerging, right? But, what it was, search was still something people were figuring out. It wasn't as obvious.
Yep.
All the best practices now that companies leverage and understand didn't really exist. They were all being kind of developed. And so that's, we had a really bright team who really focused on that. And we were able to sort of crack the code and really saw the benefits. That was one of the things. And then the other was, I was once in a meeting with our CEO and he said, hey, if I could really understand, it was kind of a discussion of investment in editorial content. And it was like, if I could really understand kind of on a unit basis, the ROI of each piece of content that we were publishing and really could kind of crack the code on that, that I could really scale this business much more. And at CitySearch, we kind of figured it out, but didn't totally figure out. But that was one of the most important kind of business concepts that sort of I left with, because it became pretty foundational in what we did at Demand Media.
Yeah. So tell me about Demand Media. Like, you were there for, I think, like how many years? 5?
We started the company in 2006 and I left at kind of the beginning of 2012. So, I was at IAC. Kind of a little bit of the story there is there was a guy named Stephen Kidd who was at Yahoo at the time. And we had done some deals. We had actually done a deal when I was at Entertainer, right, to distribute movies and television through Yahoo. And we just kind of got to know each other, built some rapport, but we're kind of just, two biz dev guys, traveling around the city or whatever. But I kind of thought he was smart. And so I called him at the beginning of 2006, kind of in January of 2006, and said, hey, I'm enjoying my time here at IC. I'm sure you're enjoying your time at Yahoo, but I do feel like there's kind of maybe this next wave of the internet's going to happen here. Kind of the .com bust had sort of filtered through, and you could see that maybe something was going to emerge. And so I said, hey, we should try to figure this out, right? This is a good moment in time. We're, good places, but maybe there's some opportunity. And so what
were you saying? Like specifically, was it content or was it something else?
It was really the internet. I mean, as you remember, like you may not remember, but like the .com was devastating, right? All your friends had moved to San Francisco. Everyone was working in these cool jobs. Everyone had great jobs. And then, it all just kind of ended almost in a day.
It was almost like this is it. Like
it's over. It was fun, but now it's over. There's not going to be any pets.com anymore, right? Things like that. So it was pretty real. And again, think about it. LA was even a smaller ecosystem. So, there was Idea Labs and there was like a CitySearch and, there was sort of remaining pieces of what IEC was doing with Ticketmaster and CitySearch. But, Overture was in Pasadena, which later got bought by Yahoo to really kind of become, the core monetization for search. But, there weren't, even close to the amount of companies that are here today. And so, so it was a little bit of that. We've kind of felt like some of this stuff was being shaken off. You were starting to see some of these companies grow. You were seeing things like Google emerge, right, as a very, very exciting new business. And so, I just, there was enough happening that it was like, maybe we should take some risk, right?
How about social media? Like Friendster maybe was coming out before MySpace at that time, because MySpace I think was like 03.
Friendster existed. MySpace certainly was kind of happening at in this era, and it sort of ties to my story a bit. So I reached out to Steven and I said, hey, let's get together. And so we just started meeting every Sunday and just maybe kind of exploring. Should we start something? Should we go? Join something that maybe already exists. And then ultimately kind of, and while at the same time kind of taking meetings, right? We were, interviewing for jobs and meeting other companies, things like that. And, we kind of came to the conclusion it might be smarter for us to kind of join with something that already exists. And as we kind of were moving along, we met Richard Rosenblatt, who was the guy who had just sold MySpace to Fox. We met him, or Steven met him, and another guy named Sean Colo, who had come from private equity. He was at a firm called Spectrum. And those two were coming together to create this new company called Demand Media. And so, Steven and I discussed it pretty quickly. Steven got on board. He was like, hey, you should really meet this other guy. He should join too. And so I met Richard, and it's kind of a funny story because, he was like, well, you and Steven are kind of the same thing. Like, do I really need both of you? We were pretty different, by the way, but like in his mind, we were kind of two biz dev guys.
Yeah, we're two peas in a pod.
A little bit. Yeah, so he's like, do I need to add you to my founding team or not? And so I kind of wrote him an email back saying, hey, it's cool. We're different, but, if you're going to build these companies, I took a page from Good to Great. It's about getting the right people on the bus and then figuring out what to drive, right? So I kind of stole from that, but I really believe it. And he responded pretty quickly saying, I haven't read many business books in my life, but I just read that one.
What are the odds?
And so he said, I agree. And so I was on the founding team. So we started that company in kind of May of 2006. There were 6, really Richard and Sean are the co-founders, but there were like 6 of us as part of the founding team. And we grew that from 6 people to 600 and took it public on the New York Stock Exchange in 2011. So it was a pretty fast and fun run.
Yeah. And what was like the biggest focus of the business? Like, what were you doing early on? But also the company.
Yeah. So sort of two parts to the business, but the part that I focused on and Stephen focused on was the media part of the business. And there we, again, it was private equity backed. We raised $120 million. We bought 3 companies, then we went on to buy a bunch of other companies, all, at least the area we were focused on, all in media. So we had...
When you say media, like what other...
websites, essentially, right? So we owned a property called eHow.
Oh, that's right.
We owned, what was once a magazine.
Saatchi Art.
That came later after I left.
Yeah.
We owned Crack.com, which was a comedy site. We built a brand with the Lance Armstrong Foundation or Livestrong Foundation called Livestrong.com.
So the idea was Demand Media was this like umbrella company that was going to have its hands in different types of media, not just content. It's going to be like...
It was primarily media driven, and this is where it kind of ties to what we were talking about earlier, heavily focused on search. Yeah. So the idea was, this property eHow we had bought, had some guys had bought it out of the .com bust, had kind of got it really working on a search basis. It was, I forget how many, it was doing like $4 million in revenue, but it was being run by like 2 dudes. It was a hyper efficient, good little media business. And we saw what was working there, and what was really working was search. And again, this is where kind of tying my past experiences, obviously we did this as a team, but mine were, I really understood search and the power of search. If you were trying to, at that era, we're trying to build media businesses. And then 2, if we could measure how much it costs to create a piece of content and really understand the economics of it, that it could be something we could scale. And that's became the engine for all the media properties that we worked on at Demand, which was understanding search. How do we improve it? We hired the Erica, who was the woman who I worked with at CitySearch. We hired her. She came over. She was our first person on search at Demand. She's still today a brilliant SEO strategist. We kind of bought these properties, kind of hooked them up, set them up properly, but then we coupled it with content creation. And to create the content, we built a platform that basically, was a community of thousands and thousands of writers and copy editors and fact checkers to build the content that ultimately populated these different websites. And eHow probably was the most scaled and successful. So, we took that site from 4 million users to 150 million users, and again, like that kind of 5 or 6 year period.
Customers are rushing to your store. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. Shopify POS is your command center for your retail store. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify has everything you need to sell in person. Get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone, transform your tablet into a point of sale system, or use Shopify's POS Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Do retail right with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/founderhour. Once again, go to shopify.com/founderhour to take your retail business to the next level today.
What's an example of like one of those pieces of content that you were creating?
I mean, for that was like a how-to site. So it could have been, how to build a deck. It could be how to change your oil. Later that's when we also started to do some stuff with the video and start to understand YouTube during that era. But it was, straight ahead how-to type stuff.
Interesting.
On the health side, it was, understanding different exercises. We had integrated into that was one of the first food tracker called the Daily Plate. So it had some good utility as well as content. So it was a variety of different properties.
So this is still pre-user generated content. Like you're doing.
It was so that was the other thing that kind of, really Richard brought to the table, which was, hey, I was at, he was there when MySpace was being built. And so he really understood user generated content. And so, we started to integrate that into some of our properties as well. Right. And so like with eHow, we invented WeHow. Right. And so anyone could, start to create an article. Ultimately ran into some issues with that and quality and those types of things. And that's why we leaned more towards kind of our own platform and controlling the editorial experience and those types of things. But we really, in that era, we really nailed understanding search and growing our audience through search. We were really good at monetizing with Google as well. So it was kind of a pretty efficient model. And then we, kind of cracked the code on really understanding the unit economics of content creation in that era. And was able to really scale it based on that, which ultimately led to us really, quickly having a platform that allowed us to grow our revenues pretty quickly and substantially and be a profitable company. And obviously that led to our IPO.
Yeah. So at IPOs, and then you mentioned you were there till 2011, and 2011, it's like Instagram's coming on the scene, Facebook's sort of already, been a thing. And maybe, content as we know it today is starting to take shape, or, the early days of that. What ultimately inspires you to start Tastemade? I think you started in 2012, right? So when you left,
we left in the beginning of, we went IPO in 11, about a year after we left. So I started Tastemade with Steven, the guy I mentioned. Mm-hmm. Our other co-founder is Joe Perez. He was also one of the 6 co-founders of Demand. And for us, it was really about sort of 2 things. One, if you're going to do startups, pick stuff you love, right? I know that sounds kind of obvious, but like it's easy for us to get out of bed in the morning if we're thinking about things like food or travel or home and design.
It's nice when something you love is also something that people are looking for in that moment. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's a demand for it, or there's like a need for it at that time. Cause sometimes there isn't, and you're just like, okay, I love horses, but like, I don't know.
It absolutely had an opportunity. We saw that at Demand, right? We were in a lot of these categories. There were some great proxies. We were talking about earlier about kind of learning from the past. A great proxy for us was, well, there was a Food Network, and there was a Travel Channel, and there was HGTV, and these were wildly successful companies with great business models. And so, yes, we took some inspiration from that. So it was sort of part passion coupled with just being students of the game and loving media. So we knew it was at the sort of the dawning of the rise of video, right? There was just kind of YouTube when we started, but all those companies you mentioned later came with video. Social was just sort of starting to emerge in a real way. Video, as I mentioned, was kind of just the beginning, and then also sort of this sort of global opportunity kind of emerged. And so we thought if we could couple kind of some of these key business trends. Mobile was the other one I was looking for. These key business trends coupled with kind of our personal passions, with a little bit of an eye of like what had come before. Could we recreate or invent kind of a modern version of the Food Network, HGTV, the Travel Channel?
Yeah. And so was the idea the same, that you were going to obviously invest in creating this content? And like, that seems like, to start something from nothing, it must take a lot of capital to have to like, have a highly produced sort of studio and all that kind of stuff. Like, did you immediately have to go out and raise money? Because I know you've raised a lot of money over the years.
Yeah, we did. We did. Our first investor was Redpoint. They led our Series A. And so they were our first investor. Jeff Yang came on our board. Jeff had backed like his firm had backed, Netflix, TiVo, companies like that, who really understood. They were in another company that was in the kind of early video YouTube days called Machinima. Mm-hmm. And so they were our first investors. But probably the smartest thing, our intention actually wasn't to spend any of that money on content. I think we were at least that smart in that era. What we did do is at the same time as we were building that business, this was at the moment where YouTube was funding channels. I don't know if you remember that era, but there was a kind of in the 2011, 2012 couple of years, YouTube put about $200 million of their funds into the ecosystem. And what they were trying to do smartly was, try to introduce new types of content to the platform, trying to engage, a little bit of engaging some Hollywood, but it wasn't just all Hollywood. It was sort of trying to engage people to up-level the content.
So they were partnering with specific people to create content?
Yeah, hundreds of companies around the world, they did it. And, also they were answering the question, which is an advertiser at that time was like, oh, well, YouTube is dogs on skateboards going backwards, right? And they had an answer to that call. And so I think part of it was some marketing, right? That was also in the era where they were opening all their studios, for the creators. So it was a little bit of marketing, but it was also, kind of fueled to pump innovation and thinking around what's possible on the platform. And so we were at Demand, we were one of the meaningful recipients of that content because we were pretty big on YouTube. But then when we started, the guys, people like, Robert Kinsel, who was running YouTube at the time, did a deal with us. So we had $2 million from YouTube. That was just, for us to innovate and try new content. So for the first 18 months, we actually didn't spend any money on content, which we're sort of proud of.
That's great. So it was just going to marketing essentially, or
it was
growth.
Well, it was in our money. I guess we spent YouTube's money, but we didn't spend any of our venture funding on.
But you had raised venture funding.
We had raised money, and we had started to build a team, and we were doing some. We had a sort of a vision around how we could use software and build a platform to enable a lot of things that we were going to try to do. Later, we had a pretty cool app that enabled people to kind of create their own 1-minute little video that we were working on. So there was some kind of core tech stuff that we were trying to do in kind of that era.
Yeah. So what? So you mentioned having to raise money, and then you sort of partnered with YouTube on that. Were there any challenges early on with getting it up and running, or was it pretty? Did you kind of understand exactly what you're building, and it was pretty quick in terms of getting it out there?
I mean, on the kind of video production side, like that stuff was pretty straightforward for us, right? We had been doing that. We understood these categories. We understood the YouTube landscape. Again, at the time, it was really only YouTube. We understood that landscape pretty well. So that stuff, I think, was pretty straightforward. One of the things we also did, kind of a thing that was kind of in vogue at the time, was aggregating channels on YouTube. You probably, Machinima was an example of that. Maker Studios was kind of but there weren't a lot of vertically oriented. It was a lot of kind of just scale.
Yep.
And so we did that as well, right? So one of the things that, obviously, if we were going to be this new network, right, we needed some audience. And so in addition to creating our own content under our own brand as part of that YouTube partnership, we also started to aggregate other channels. And that's what enabled us to kind of get some early traction with audience, so that we then could go back and have, start to have conversations with advertisers. Because then we had sort of the 1-2 punch of, Tastemade's this brand, and it's, really high quality, and it really is distanced from everything else that's on the internet at the time. It was just a sort of a notch above. And then we've gone and curated sort of the best around the world of YouTubers and creators who were doing great food-related content. We've aggregated them under kind of the Tastemade network. And so if an advertiser came to work with us, they could obviously do something with us directly, sponsored content, something like that. But they could also tap into our network. And that was a pretty appealing proposition from that standpoint. I think the building, right, like we were developing apps and, kind of building the beginnings of kind of our platform that would house and distribute all our content. And so some of that stuff, as particularly it's early, you don't know what all the problems yet you'll face. And so some of that's a little bit more guessing and reacting to being wrong, and guessing a little bit more, kind of doing your best to innovate there.
Yeah. So as the sort of content landscape changes over the years, social media growing, and then the iPhone and having cameras in our pockets, that's getting better and better. Granted, it's not like you can't compare it to a high quality camera. I think I saw recently that digital cameras are coming back. I just bought a new one.
My daughter was just playing with one.
It's kind of like you want to just have a camera and not everything. But as that happens, how does the business change with it over time?
Yeah, I would say that's probably been the biggest challenge for anyone kind of in our space, right? If you wanted to be in video, in any form of media business, and not be a platform, it's been, interesting for sure, but also challenging. Yeah. And some of that is just how dynamic all of this, this whole world has been, right? I just talked a second ago about a world where really YouTube was the only place that people would watch video on the internet. Obviously that's changed dramatically. The cool part for us is pretty early on, we established ourselves as, people who were doing high quality content, who were brand, we had some of those great attributes of lifestyle content. We were super brand friendly. Everyone loves food. They were kind of universal topics. They weren't comedy. There was nothing salacious about it. So we set ourselves up, in part because of those choices, to be just excellent partners to the platforms. So, you name it, when something launched, Tastemade was there. So like there was a moment when, in I think 2015, Apple TV only used to have 6 apps on it.
Yeah.
And Tastemade was the 6th one added,
Wow.
And, we kind of had some mid-form content. It's not what we do today in streaming, but it was sort of the beginnings of kind of like, oh, this is a way in which we can bring our content to TV. When Facebook, started getting video, we were a true pioneer, right? We were one of the first companies that was really bringing video to in any meaningful way to Facebook. When they launched Facebook Watch, right? Tastemade was the company they partnered with. When they launched Tastemade Live or Facebook Live, that we were the partner that they launched with in 6 different companies or countries. With Instagram, same thing. So, when Pinterest launched with video, they partnered with Tastemade. So, Snapchat Discover had 20 channels on it at one point. We were one of those 20 channels. So,
So you were sort of always trying to be like one of those early channels, essentially, on these new platforms.
It was both. Yeah, we wanted to be there, but those partners, that they knew if they were going to, because they weren't relevant in video.
Yeah.
Like there was a moment where there was no video on Instagram, right?
Yep.
They had to become relevant.
I remember
quickly.
that when they launched that.
Yeah, and so we were a great partner to them because, one, people could look at what we were doing and see we were doing it cooler, better, smarter. So that was good for them. We would inspire others to do it. And then it was good for us, to be there first because we could bring our advertising partners into that type of environment. On Snapchat, when we launched on Snapchat Discover, the people who were on Snapchat Discover at its origin, this was 2015, weren't doing vertical video. So you would go and watch, ABC News Live or whatever it might be, and it would be
just black on
top and bottom.
Yeah.
And so we brought vertical video into that environment. We brought one of the first advertisers, Coca-Cola, into that. So we really innovated along with the platforms, on a way to build kind of a big audience on social.
I know also, if I know correctly, you have partnered with many personalities over the years on launching shows and things like that. How do you approach those partnerships and collaborations?
Yeah, one of the key things for us was, we were cognizant of, we wanted to build the Tastemade brand, not to build any, one particular star's brand or we had some early opportunities when we started Tastemade where, we went and met with maybe a chef that is kind of currently canceled, right? And so they were like, oh, we'll partner with you, but I want 10% of your company. And we politely declined. And obviously that turned out to be a very wise decision. So we was really focused on how do we build the Tastemade brand and enable people to connect with us. That being said, we've got some great IP and we've had some people who have really broken out, and we have worked with kind of the full spectrum. In the early days, it really was, how do you activate this new farm, this new crop of talent? Many of the people, the creators that were on YouTube. And so we did a great job of kind of curating, partnering with them. We did tons of work with brands with them. And so I think it worked out well for many of them. Some of those people we still work with today. Probably the most notable is a guy named Frankie Salenza, who's the host of a show we have called Struggle Meals. We discovered Frankie on YouTube, like in kind of 13, 14. He kind of joined our network, and then we went on to start making shows with him. When Facebook launched Facebook Watch, they commissioned a show from us called Struggle Meals. Frankie was the host. It was a successful successful Facebook experience, and then we've gone on to turn that into a TV show, which now we've created over 100 episodes, and Frankie and performing in those episodes won an Emmy, beating out Netflix and the Food Network. So he's probably the perfect example of someone who's been with us the whole journey and has kind of seen every different thing that we've done together. But we've done lots of short form stuff with whether it's Thomas Keller, Curtis Stone.
I think I saw you recently started one with Ellen Marie Bennett. I've had her on the show.
Ellen Bennett, yeah, we just. Yeah. Oh, you have?
She's great. She's amazing.
Oh yeah, she's
Hedley
great.
Bennett. Yep.
Yeah, so that's a fun story for us, right? Because we met Ellen pretty early on, like kind of when she was starting out, when we were starting out. We did a little collab. There was like a Tastemade
Yep.
Apron with her. We just really, really liked her and she was a great entrepreneur, great person to hang out with. And so, some of these people, we've had relationships like that long time in the running. And just now are we getting to, kind of what we do. But yeah, we just launched a new show called Kitchen Glow Up with Ellen. It did really well. It's a really great show. And we're really excited about that. But yeah, some that one's sort of like through a chance meeting as that happens. But we've also just worked with tons of people on, tons of creators on TikTok or Snap or Instagram. We'll do short form content with them, get to know each other. Maybe we'll do some collabs where they'll create some stuff. We'll just share it on some of our, we have about 160 million followers on our social channels. So we've got a great footprint there to collaborate with others.
What about like having a global presence? How do you sort of appeal to different audiences and internationally? Like, it's interesting because, I feel like, you mentioned Thomas Keller. I mean, he brought like French cuisine, American French cuisine. And it just, the globalization of food food has become more and more globalized, it seems, over the years, or at least different cuisines. But I guess in your experience, do you have like a certain strategy in terms of trying to appeal to audiences in like Asia or Europe versus America?
Yeah, it's interesting because we're going after the food category, and when we were starting, right, kind of 2012, and really YouTube was the only game in town. There weren't that, I know this is a super, tons of creators now that touch on these topics. But, there were like hundreds, like literally like 300. I don't think any of us would say there's 300 creators now talking about food on the internet.
Yeah.
And so we went and found them and curated them. But guess what? They were all over the world. So many of them were in the US, but some of them were in Brazil. Some of them were in Japan. Some of them were in Southeast Asia. And so that was the beginning of us building kind of this global community of people that, we could pick up the phone with and collaborate with. And so as we started to, have success on particularly some of these new platforms like Facebook and the like, became very clear to us we could replicate what we were doing, but just do it in more markets. And so when we went to open those markets, we did so with many of the people that we had kind of met in the YouTube days. So like, the first person who was running Brazil for us was someone who kind of came from that YouTube MCN kind of creator community.
Yep.
And so that's how we really did it. Is we had super smart people who were very scrappy. Some of the video production values and the aesthetic that they were doing in their countries was even much better than what we were seeing in the United States. We could work with them around an idea and it would come back with, different, but with the Tastemade vibe. And so that really empowered us to, get to a lot of different, so we create content in 7 different languages. We have a joint venture in Japan with Mitsui, who manages what we do there, but we're in Brazil and, pretty prolific in, Spanish speaking South America, places like Indonesia, India, in the UK. So Tastemade's been pretty prolific from that perspective. The key thing for us was we really did make content from those markets for those markets.
Yep.
Meaning we didn't try to just take what we did here in the US and export it. We really worked with those local teams who fully knew and understood the nuances of, the categories and food in their countries, could do it super authentically, but just, kind of started with that Tastemade as its core.
Yeah. So looking into the future, we talked about how like content has just changed over time with the introduction of new technologies and social. Where do you see it going? I mean, obviously AI is a big thing right now and just new technologies. And it sounds like you've been sort of on the forefront of implementing new technologies or just kind of being on new platforms. But like, do you have a kind of good sense of where it's going, or does it just feel like a wild west right now of like, where is this whole sort of industry headed?
Yeah. So there's no doubt, right? The proliferation of creators, this type of video content on all these platforms, I think that's absolutely going to continue to happen. And again, Tastemade still, hundreds of millions of people watch Tastemade on social each month. So I'm confident that we'll continue to connect with all the different consumers that are interacting with that kind of content in social. What happened for us is in 2018, I mentioned kind of we had sort of had interest in TV, but we didn't really launch anything in earnest in streaming until 2018. And there we launched a 24/7 linear streaming television network on YouTube TV. So not YouTube, but YouTube TV.
So kind of like CNN, but for food.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And so, if you're a YouTube TV subscriber, this is the kind of skinny bundle product, or what was called a skinny bundle. You can get NBC, you can get CNN, you can get the Food Network, but now you can get Tastemade. When we started on that product in 2018, it maybe had 400,000 subscribers, maybe it had 700,000 subscribers, less than 1 million for sure. It, now has almost 8 million subscribers. And so that sort of kicked off a new era for us. And it was exciting to us because it was kind of closest to our original vision, which is we wanted to create kind of a modern take on what we had seen before. We love the Food Network. We love HGTV. We love the Travel Channel. But we thought there was a new opportunity to bring kind of a fresh look to it. So we have, fresh talent. The type of content and programming we're doing is new and innovative. Real focus on, the food and the food experience. And so, we've built that over the years and been pretty successful doing it. So started with YouTube, but then we went on all those other type services, whether it's, DirecTV or Sling or Fubo or Philo, all of those kind of bundled package. We're on all those. And then also kind of a new thing that emerged or newer was the kind of creation of what's called free ad supported streaming television, or AVOD. And so you had new services that emerged like the Roku channel or Tubi or Pluto, or, Amazon has a product called Freevee. Samsung, now when you buy a TV, you get all these free channels with it called Samsung TV Plus.
Yep.
And so Tastemade is very prolific on all of those platforms as well. And so, on streaming television, we reach about 13 million people. It's the fastest growing part of our business. So our audience was up about 50% in Q1.
It's interesting that you took the sort of bundling route, or you part of a bundle, because it seems like throughout the last several years, it's been the opposite with a lot of these platforms, like Paramount launching Paramount Plus, or just different pluses, right? It's all these different platforms that are spinning out into their own kind of separate platform. But I feel like it ebbs and flows, like the bundling and the unbundling of content, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And we definitely made a choice to go ad supported, right? If we were going to go in and, that's one of our advantages versus everything else that YouTube is paying, YouTube TV is paying for, right? They have to pay sub fees on ESPN and ABC and, or at least retrans fees. And for these other networks, our offering is you don't have to pay the sub fees, but we want a split of the advertising. And so that works out quite well for us. It was a great complement to what we were doing because brands come to us, they want to work with us. We've, kind of historically really generated revenue through sponsored content and creating, unique ways for brands to reach our audience on social. This now allows them to also just buy spots and dots. So you might have, an advertiser who really just wants to do that. And it's, as that's a very scalable business. So yeah, I think it's been an exciting time for us to sort of add that to what we've been doing.
Is there anything else that you see in terms of the future of the digital media space? I guess I'm just trying to see. I'm just fascinated by how it changes so much so fast, but then there's still, like you said, certain pieces of content that have been able to just sustain throughout all those changes.
Yeah, I think I didn't. Yeah, the thing I wanted to say about the last point too, which sort of connects to this, is that sort of things we've seen in the past, right, tend to return. So the unbundling is maybe returning to the bundling, right? And I definitely think that's what we're going to see with a lot of these apps because, right, I just threw even just a second ago a bunch of different acronyms at you, right?
Yep.
And, that's maybe some inside baseball for someone like me who's on the front lines of that. But in the end, we're going to have a handful of apps. Let's say one's going to be HBO Max. And it's going to have, it didn't have any advertising before. So now it has, now is a little AVOD and SVOD. It didn't have streaming channels in it before, right? You only could watch on demand, but guess what? Now it has it. You can watch CNN as a lean back experience now. You can watch, they've kind of rebranded Bleacher Report. You can watch some sports that way. And so these future apps are going to, bring it all together. Amazon's doing a really good job of this. You can get all the content on demand, but then they're merchandising Tastemade, channels like Tastemade within Prime. So you can get that kind of lean back streaming experience as well. And then you can also get all the content on demand with advertising. So I think we're going to lead towards, sort of a rebundling. I think the last piece is how are some of these subscription things that you mentioned, some of the pluses, how are they going to come together and be, rebundled? Obviously, with the Paramount news just dropped last night, and that was one of the, it's pretty clear in the what they put out that they're looking for some partner to bundle, and they talked about the importance of kind of bundling, and obviously that's been a cornerstone with cable networks on how these companies have made money over the years, and so I think there's absolutely some desire.
Not to mention for a consumer, like having 10 different subscriptions kind of adds up, and you're just like, at some point it just makes sense to just subscribe to one bundle and not have all these different.
Yeah, it's interesting though, but some of those bundles are like our cell phones, right? Like I can get, I think I'm a T-Mobile subscriber, right? So I get a handful of these subscriptions through that relationship. So there's also going to be just different ways these things get bundled. So that even makes it more complex for the consumer to navigate and figure out.
Yeah. What about the future of Tastemade? Like what's coming that you're excited about? Any developments that you're working on? Things like that.
Yeah, I think it's really the streaming stuff that I mentioned. Right, the audience is really doing well. We can see that if you're part of the thing we've had a study over time is where our audience is going to grow, and then where is the advertising opportunity going to grow? And one of the fastest growing segments of advertising is streaming, connected TV, and so we like being kind of connected to what we would call the fast moving water from that perspective. So we're very excited about that. We're doing some, we continue to be partners. We're doing some great partnerships with people like Amazon. So, earlier this year, we signed a 15-show first look deal with them. Our first show is we're shooting this summer. That's with Tilly Ramsey, which is Gordon Ramsay's daughter. So it's a great sort of talent story there. Again, like we're the modern version of what maybe came before. So we're super excited to partner and work with her. We have more shows that we're working on developing with them, which is exciting. Live streaming commerce is also something that we've been trying to be smart and cautious about, right? I think we've already seen it's a place where some things can kind of come and go pretty quick. And so we kind of try to be cognizant of that. We found a good partnership in that regard with Amazon. So Amazon Live's kind of not that well known, but guess what? People tend to sleep on Amazon. I can't fathom why they would do that, but they do. But that's a product we've been working with them for a while. You can go to Amazon Live and check out the Tastemade channel. There, we're creating a variety of different content with creators, with design to sell product. We've started to also work there with Amazon with advertisers, and so we think we can be a great, as we have been over the years, a great partner to a platform as they're trying to innovate in new formats and maybe up-level the quality of what's happening and long-term be pretty strategic. So that's something that's new for us that I'm excited about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think Amazon I think people sleep on it because maybe they don't think of Amazon as like a content media company, but when you really look at what they've done, they've put out some really good stuff. Like I'm really enjoying some of the shows on Amazon right now.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. Jury Duty was that was done by the Lauren Anderson and team.
Yep, I'm watching The Boys right now.
Okay, good. That's a good one too. That's right.
Very edgy, but it's good.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, but Larry, this has been such a fun conversation. Appreciate you coming by and sharing your story with us.
Absolutely, it's really great to connect with you, and love hearing the stories. I got to listen to a bunch of them, and so I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.